So this is what I've been looking forward to for a long time. This is Becky Ellis. Now, Becky is the first ever executive director of Urban Roots, which started here in London. And I think it was around, was it 2015, 2016? I can't remember.
2017.
17. And I remember talking with folks back then about it, but it's just flourished in this last while. Part of that I know is due to your leadership. And, this is all taking place, Becky, in the time of where the Curb Hunger food drive is about ready to start. Now, Urban Roots has been part of that since 2018, once it made a transition from blue boxes over to fresh food.
Yeah.
At that point, Urban Roots joined us and really became an important voice and partner in that whole thing. But this is the 27th year for that drive. So it's been around a long time, but we're really loving the shift away from kind of the blue box kind of thing and perishable, not perishable foods over to this more perishable side. So I think it's really appropriate that you're here with us because I think you have way more knowledge about this stuff than I do. But Becky, why don't you give us a bit of your background because it is pretty impressive.
Sure. So I have a master's in anthropology from Western University, in which I studied community gardens and the role they play in a sense of belonging in neighborhoods in cities. It was focused on Toronto. And I have my PhD in geography from Western University. And for that, I focused on the relationship between people and bees in cities. So looking at honeybees, but also native bees. And one of the best practices for promoting healthy ecosystems and pollinator health is actually urban agriculture. So I was looking at some urban farms in London and Toronto and community gardens, as well as really great spaces for pollinators of all kinds. And so I also have been involved in the urban agriculture community here in London for about 20 years. So I've had community gardens. I've run programs for the community gardens. I ran a children's garden program for a couple of years. I have, been involved as a staff person for the City of London, helping to coordinate community gardens. And now here I am at Urban Roots.
That's awesome. I think we so much need your voice in this whole mix. I do think that London is beginning to come to terms more with urban agriculture, but also with the stuff that's growing on all around us in southwestern Ontario. I've said this before, but we only have 4% of the land in Canada that's growable, but Southwest Ontario produces 26% of the food that's produced in Canada. So we have a lot going on here around food, around agriculture, urban agriculture, but it tends to be hit and miss. It's been that way for a while. And I think that you're coming and Urban Roots being here along with other partners is going to help to move us along that direction, which we really need to do. I would be interested, Becky, into hearing what your definition of food security is. Now, I didn't tell you I was going to hit you with that, but I think people tend to think if we can help a hungry family and give them food, that's food security, right? But that's not really what we're fighting for here, right? And what we're trying to make happen here, what we want it to be is that a family would be able to access affordable food anywhere that's necessary. But I'd be interested in your view of food security. How would you define it?
I would define food security as the ability of people to access healthy, nutritious, and culturally appropriate food that they need and also that they want. But I also think it would link to the ability of the local food system or the regional food system to be able to provide most of that food for people. Of course, there are things that can't be grown in certain regions that are really important parts of people's diets, like coffee, for example. But there are many things that can be grown in this region, as we know. And so I think part of food security is also having an agricultural system that can provide most or at least a lot of the needs for the people who live in the region as well. And so, yeah, it involves so many different things to me. It's not just about individual families being able to afford the food that they need. It's also about individual families being able to afford the food they need without it causing other hardship in their lives. So if to afford the food they need, they are not able to pay some of their utility bills, that's a huge problem. That's not food security. And so then it also, I think, relates to the ability of people who want to engage in agriculture to be able to engage in agriculture. And that's a huge barrier in Southwestern Ontario to new people who want to grow, especially, a variety of vegetables and herbs and fruit for people to eat in their community. It can be a real barrier to access land and to be able to learn the skills to do that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Way better than I could have done. So I remember a few years ago when COVID started, we built a greenhouse, and it was a fairly large one. And it was just John Fleming and Luis and I trying to get it all together. It was pretty hilarious. We didn't know what we were doing. But I remember I took a drone shot above the food bank and of the food bank building itself. But then there was our team tomato patch, which is, growing tomatoes at the back. There was our compost area, which is great. And then, of course, there was the greenhouse. I remember how excited we were to see all of that and see it in perspective. And then a few days ago, I went on to Urban Roots website, and you have something similar. But when you look at it, it's so extensive. You've got the greenhouses there, the rows of stuff going on, your educational programs that are going on there. It really is special. And I think Urban Roots goes by, I remember from the very beginning, they said they go by the thirds.
Yes.
Can you tell me what the thirds is? Because that might be informative.
Sure. So the folks who founded Urban Roots London were really interested in urban agriculture, but they had also noticed that in some other cities in North America that they had visited, like Toronto and New York City and Vancouver, the urban agriculture operations were mostly providing food that was actually quite expensive for everyday people to buy. It was, organic food. Our food's organic as well, but it was just more expensive for people to buy, and often being sold almost exclusively in some cases to restaurants who could pay a premium cost for the food, and that it wasn't really getting to everyday working people who were struggling to be able to afford, healthy and delicious and fresh organic food. And so they really wanted to change that. So they had this model of thirds. And so that model is that a third of the food produced will be donated, a third will be affordable, and a third will be sold at a higher rate to restaurants and food operations. What's actually happened is more than a third of the food that we've grown has been donated, and more than a third has been affordable. So that's actually become more of our focus, is finding ways to get food to people who need it, either food that we donate or food that we sell below market cost. And that's very high priority for Urban Roots London.
Yeah. We've also benefited from Urban Roots over the years, right? You brought some food in our direction, which we really appreciated. But I know Luis from the food bank has also been down seeing you folks at Urban Roots. He's our agronomist, and he's from Chile. He's got a lot of knowledge. So he always comes back very excited from that. I think I read in the paper recently, did you just acquire 2 more greenhouses? Is that correct, from a Trillium Grantors? Do I have that right?
Yeah, so we the pictures that people can see in the drone shots on our website, those are 2 hoop houses, and they've been great, but actually our needs have expanded. So there's been growing demand for our food, which is great. So we have acquired and installed 2 larger greenhouses now as well. And that was funded through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. So we're very, very thankful to be able to do that. And we're still in the process of getting them hooked up with water and electricity, but they will be heated greenhouses. So We are planning to extend what we grow later into the fall and start earlier in the spring, and then also to grow our seedlings like right on site. Right now, we grow them at another location. And that just gets a bit difficult for our farm staff, always having to go back and forth. So we'll have our seedlings right there. So that's really exciting for us. And we're excited that we'll be able to produce more food for people, especially in the kind of shoulder season. Yeah. Or the shoulder parts of the season when there's generally not as much food that we're able to grow outside.
That's really true about the seedlings. Like when the greenhouse, our hoop house got going, it was awesome. It's all coming into the food bank, but we're now at about 55% of the food that we get and give out is perishable food, produce, meats, dairy, those kind of things. So that's a significant accomplishment for us. But when you go in and see Louise now, the greenhouse there behind the food bank is full of seedlings in this pile. So what's ended up happening is that the greenhouse, because it has that bit of an edge at the beginning, of the season, that it can be growing seedlings that are somewhat farther along and can go out into gardens on things like that once the frost is done. The greenhouse now is almost full of seedlings for other groups.
Oh, that's great.
And it's good, but you realize, that, they're able to start earlier. They may be able to have an extra harvest or something, but a lot of them don't have these kind of amenities like a hoop house or a greenhouse to be able to grow this stuff early before they plant it in. So we've just decided as a food bank, we'll just keep using it that way as a feeder for the different agencies that are out there to get started early on their own stuff. And so I really appreciate the fact, and I understand a bit better about what you're doing about the seedlings. What else is going on there? So you have the greenhouses, but talk to me about some of the other stuff that you have going.
So we have 1 acre under production at our main site, which is 21 Norland Avenue. And our approach is that we grow our food using organic principles. And we're really trying to nurture the soil to create really healthy soil. So that is a really big focus of Ben, who is our director of farm operations, is to create healthy, vibrant, alive soil. And then we'll have healthier plants. And so that's a big focus of ours. We have a community compost program that's been running and that we're always tweaking and getting at an even better spot. So we're continuing to run that and to work on that to encourage people to bring their fruits and veggies, scraps, and we'll compost them. And the ideal for us is that we'll be able to use that compost right on our farm. So have as little kind of waste and not bring as much stuff to the farm from other places. So kind of close the loops of the farm, of the life cycle of the plants. We do intensive farming. So it is, small scale organic farming. We grow things intensively. So we grow a lot on that 1 acre. So last year we produced 22,000 pounds of food on that acre. So there's a lot of food that can be grown in small spaces. This year we plan to expand it. The hope is that we'll be growing 26,000 pounds of food at that location. And we have 2 other smaller spaces in the city where we'll grow an additional 4,000 pounds of food. So altogether, we're hoping to grow 30,000 pounds of food for the community, all in the city of London, which I think is really great. And, our focus is growing food for people that is affordable and delicious and fresh. But we also have another focus, which is to use ecological methods in the way that we grow the food. And so that's a really big focus, nurturing the soil, nurturing biodiversity on the farm, composting, kind of closing that loop to make sure there's not waste that goes off the farm as much as possible, and always looking for ways. So, sometimes small scale farmers use like a black plastic as mulch because it really heats up the soil and the plants like it and it keeps the weeds down. But we're focusing on green mulches and growing things very close to one another to create like a living mulch. So that there's always things that we're trying to do to get away from things like using, plastic on the farm and things like that. So it's always a work in progress. But we're really interested in food security and also growing things in the most ecologically restorative and responsible way possible.
So that's what you have three values, right? It's ecosystem accountability.
Yes.
Is it meaningful work? I'm trying to.
Meaningful work, yes.
And then the other one was food system equity. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So I think you've explained the other two, but can you talk to me about the meaningful work aspect? I'm interested to see how you view that.
Yeah, so we are a living wage employer. So we look at the living wage for London and we pay all our employees the living wage or above the living wage. The nonprofit sector has some issues, I think, with work and how work happens. And we're working towards being a workplace in which people have more stable employment. That's a little difficult, as you may know, like there are funding issues where we don't always know, but our goal is to provide work that is, decent, is well paid, is safe, but is also meaningful and joyful. And so we want people to have a really wonderful experience on the farm as workers. We want them to, be able to learn about the food system and to be able to make broader connections to issues that they may be concerned about. We want to provide a workplace where people have a chance to interact with non-human nature and with food in a way that is fulfilling to them, and it also connects them to the community as well. And so meaningful work is a really big part of our mandate. And not only the nonprofit sector, I think, has some issues with work, and it's not always the fault of the sector. It's a lot to do with the funding model. But I think farming has even more problems and issues. We also just want to get the message out there that farm work is hard work. It's important work. It's skilled work. It's often called unskilled labor. But I have a PhD. In 2021, I had a small farm operation. I rented some land outside the city, and I used some of my knowledge from my PhD to do that farm, but like a lot of stuff I was just learning by making mistakes. I was learning so much from just my interactions with the plants and the land and non-human nature. I learned a lot from that experience about farming. Different, but I would say as much as I learned from my PhD that was focused on urban agriculture. So, it's very skilled labor. It's hard. And I think it's been really unvalued. There are many, many complicated reasons why it's been unvalued. But we would love to see more small scale organic farms, both in cities and in the countryside, in which the workers on those farms are really highly valued in our society as really important workers, and treated fairly in all aspects of their labor. So that's what we'd like to see. And I think the farming sector has a long way to go, but we want to be part of that. And the thing about small scale organic agriculture is, for the most part, it relies almost solely on human labor. So we sometimes use equipment, but we don't have a tractor or anything like that. It's human labor. It's a lot of human labor. It's a lot of work to have 1 acre under in intensive production. And so I personally think that for the future, when we think about the climate and the biodiversity crisis, we need more small-scale organic farms, and that means we need more people working on the farms. And that therefore means it needs to be the types of jobs that people actually want to do. So that's what we hope to be part of.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Can we just pivot for a second? I think you were chair, is this correct? You were chair of the city's Urban Agriculture Steering Committee. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
How long were you doing that for?
I was doing that for 2 years, and it was at the very beginning. I believe it was 2018, so just after the urban agriculture strategy had been adopted by the city council, they started the steering committee, and so I was the chair of that for the first 2 years, and we were really looking at ways to try to take this document that was a really great document about urban agriculture in London and try to kind of turn it into like tangible action on the ground. And, that was, we brought together a lot of different people. People have been advocates for a long time. And then also city staff. And we're trying to like work together to see how we might be able to do that. And, a slow process, but I do think a really important process for the city of London.
So I was part of the London plan stuff in the beginning, as urban agriculture strategy was being brought into that. But there was this sense that we've arrived, we're here, we're going to become this food kind of city, a smart city, blah, 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 blah. And then everything kind of got away on us. And it, not just, I just mean as a city in general, and it was tough. And I know for the organizers, it's been a bit, it's been a disappointment to them that we didn't get farther down the road with some of the stuff that was happening. How do you feel? Because you would have had your finger on the pulse there as the chair of the steering committee. Where do you think London is at the moment? Do you think we had a moment and kind of lost it? Or do you think we're slowly emerging from the fog and starting to get it? How do you see it?
I think we're still emerging from the fog. I think that COVID didn't help because there was a lot of confusion. For example, you might remember at the very beginning of COVID, it was all a very confusing time. There was confusion about whether or not community gardens could operate that year, for example. And it was just a very strange time. Like, we're a community farm at Urban Roots. We have a lot of events for the community, and a lot of that was halted. So COVID threw in some difficulties. It kind of threw a wrench in the process, and these things are very slow processes, like especially when it comes to identifying and changing certain bylaws can be very slow. So it's a process that I think has been slow, but I think it's still happening. I feel, as the executive director of Urban Roots London, I feel the support from city staff and city councillors as well for urban agriculture, for urban farms. I think that they want to see more of them. There are some difficulties about, zoning and bylaws and things like that. Urban Roots has been kind of working through a lot of that with city staff over the years. And there's been some real strides forward that we've seen that we hope will be helpful for other urban farms as well. And I will say that something about the city of London that I'm not sure people fully appreciate is that the city of London has a really great community gardens program. It has a lot of community gardens for a city of its size. It's unusual for a city of its size to have this many community gardens. And the city staff who oversee the community gardens are always really helpful in starting new gardens. There are some barriers that come up that can frustrate people, but they want to see more community gardens. So that's something I've also been involved in. I just started a community garden in my neighborhood last year. And so, there's a lot of great people who work for the City of London who really want to see this happen. The process is slow. I know it can be frustrating for people. And I do think that COVID kind of threw a wrench in things and slowed things down even more. But I do think that I do have hope for the City of London to be like a vibrant food city when it comes to urban agriculture. I think that there are a lot of people doing really exciting things. I think there's city staff support. And I think there's support on council as well. There's some things that come up where there's some conflict between like neighbors and people who want to do or want to start some urban agriculture operations. And I think some of that can be solved with education because people don't know a lot about farming. They don't know a lot about small scale farming. Some things that cause, I think, conflict at all scales is composting. I found that from like a backyard scale to community gardens to urban farms, that there's some conflict around composting and decay and things like that. And I think for most people, educating them about it, talking about it, that's something that we try to do at Urban Roots. That's something I'd love to see the City of London have some education campaigns around around different aspects of urban agriculture and also urban gardening that can try to like dissipate some of the conflict between neighbors. So things about composting, when it comes to gardening or farming in a way that is ecologically sensitive. There's other stuff about decay, and some people don't like to see any decay, but that is a part of the healthy life cycle in an ecosystem. So some of those educational materials I think would be really great. I know that the city wants to see some educational materials about the importance of urban agriculture and climate action, which I think is a really great thing to talk about with people, to ignite some conversations. So I think there's a lot of potential, but I think there's also a lot of work to do, and it involves a lot of people coming together. And I'd like to see some like on the ground action, because I do know, we've come together, like the urban agriculture community came together to make that strategic plan, and it's a great document. So we don't necessarily need great documents as much as we need to be like talking about these ideas with the community, educating people in the community, doing projects that are successful, and then like talking about how great they are. I think that that's something that needs to happen. So we need like action as well.
Yeah. We've got about 5 minutes left here. So I think a lot of what you said is going to be brought out during the Curb Hunger Food Drive, right? Because we're focusing on climate, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations that talk about that. But I did want to ask you, you've been there since February. You're the first executive director Urban Roots has had. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to take it?
I would like to see Urban Roots be able to nurture a new generation of urban farmers. So both in having staff come and learn, grow as leaders of the urban agriculture community, and either move on to start their own farms or to keep working at Urban Roots. I'd like to see Urban Roots be involved in incubating new farmers and new farms as well. I think we've had a lot of experience doing this. We've had challenges, we've had successes, and I'd like to be able to share that with people who also want to start urban farms. I think more urban farms would be amazing in the city of London. So we definitely like to be part of that. We'd like to expand the amount of work that we do with the community, providing this delicious food to people in the community. So we like to produce more food for people, but also to be able to have more people come to our farm and learn about urban agriculture, learn about ecological farming, all different aspects of it, how it can be a strategy of climate action, how it can nurture a healthy ecosystem in a city. And just feel connected. I think one of the best things about urban farms is that it connects people to non-human nature. It connects people to their food. It helps them be able to access food. But it also connects people to the lands, I think, in a deeper way, where they feel a real connection to place, to their neighborhoods, to their communities, and to one another as well. So I think there's a lot of benefits for urban agriculture. I'd love people to be able to see that from experiencing it on our farm. And I'd love to see more urban farms. And I hope Urban Roots can help to foster that in the community.
I think you're a real community treasure, Becky. I knew that before we even talked today, but I think, what the food bank was that we decided to take a leadership role in urban agriculture by doing these different things, but that wasn't really our mandate, so to speak. The problem was because of COVID and other things were kind of on hold. So we thought we have the profile, so let's try to keep the conversation going, but we didn't have the expertise. We didn't have the background or things like that you do. And it's so helpful, I think, for us now. I think we played our role in those moments, but you're really coming along with substance. Urban Roots is doing that as well. I know Jay Stanford in the city and stuff will, but I just think you're a real community treasure. And if you don't mind, I wouldn't mind calling on you some more for these programs as we move forward, because this food drive is designed to move urban agriculture along that road. And we're going to need people that understand the map and know where to go. And that's going to be you. I really thank you for doing this, Becky. And I think we need to talk. You're educating us all, and we appreciate it. And we thank you very much to all the folks at Urban Roots for what you've done. I mean, that whole model of thirds is an awesome model.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'll continue to expand it. Thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it, Becky.
Thank you.
Okay.
Have a lovely day.
You too.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV.